السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all ikhlas and sincerity, and to make us among those who always make their gatherings for the sake of Allah, following the way of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. Inshallah ta'ala, briefly, I want to remind myself and everyone, and these are all introductions to series to come, inshallah ta'ala. But just, and then after that, if there's any questions, one of these reminders with regards to some of the diseases of the heart. Since the heart is the foundation of all things, and depends on what's in the heart, then the speech and action follow. For a person to enter the Jannah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he has to return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with a sound heart. ولا تخزيني يوم يبعثون يوم لا ينفع مال ولا بنون إلا من أتى الله بقلب. Disgrace me on the day when they will be resurrected, on the day when there's no wealth nor offspring would benefit the person except for those who come with a sound heart. So a sound heart that has no diseases in it has been enriched with the love of Allah and the fear of Allah and the hope for the rewards from Allah, and the rest of the good deeds, versus to be purified from the diseases of the heart. One of these diseases of the heart is the love of this worldly life. To have this love of this worldly life that can be sinful, in which I choose the beauty of this life over the hereafter. But the love of this worldly life, if we truly love Allah and we read the Quran the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we would love what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves, and we would hate what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hates. And how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described, and how our attitude and our life concerning this life versus what's mentioned in the Quran. So this is something that we need to really reflect upon. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, اعلموا أنما الحياة الدنيا لعب وله وزينة وتفاخر بينكم وتكاثر في الأموال والأولاد. 5 things. Have the knowledge. Know that this worldly life is لعب, play, له, amusement, zina, adornment, تفاخر بينكم. Everyone wants to be better than the other, having pride towards one another. تكاثر في الأموال والأولاد. تكاثر, multiplying in wealth and offspring. This is what this worldly life is. كمثل غيث أعجب الكفار نباته ثم يهيج فتراه مصفرا ثم يكون حطاما. Like the rain, when the tiller likes it and it rains and then the plant grows, then it becomes strong and green, and then it turns yellow afterwards, and then it disappears, it dies afterwards. The same cycle, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the plants and the cycle of the plants for the human beings also to remember that they go through the same thing. وفي الآخرة عذاب شديد ومغفرة من الله ورضوان. But for the hereafter, either a severe punishment from Allah or forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the pleasure of Allah. وما الحياة الدنيا إلا متاع الغرور. And this worldly life is nothing but a متاع, temporary enjoyment, and it's al-ghurur, that means it's deception. So the Prophet ﷺ, how he lived this life, and even when he said الدنيا سجن المؤمن وجنة الكافر, the dunya is the prison of the believer and the Jannah of the disbeliever, because the believer, he has to withhold himself. That's what a sijn is. When someone is in prison, he's not able to do everything that he desires. So the same thing for the believers in this world. They have to make a choice, and they have to be patient, because not everything that you desire you would want to get in this life. Otherwise, you would deprive yourself from the rewards in the hereafter, meaning, again, the sinful desires. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most merciful. And there is something that people, when they spread among people that in Islam you're not going to be deprived from any fun and the deen is fun. This is something that is wrong understanding of what this deen is about. Yes, a person would enjoy the real enjoyment of this life, not the enjoyment of the ways of the disbelievers, thinking that this is the enjoyment of the people of the deen. No, the enjoyment of being close to Allah, the enjoyment of being obedient to Allah. And when a person is patient and away from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade and busy with the things that requires patience and seeking rewards from Allah, then it becomes one's joy in this life. And therefore, as a result of having to understand that the love of this worldly life that can harm the heart and make it as a disease in the heart, there are things that can be signs, or a person can judge whether he is among those who love this worldly life or not. So if the person is uh, the concern is the concern of this life. This is the concern that a person have: the happiness, the sadness, the all kinds of emotional distress, or the opposite. All of that is focused on matters of dunya and matters of dunya only. If a person oversleeps a salah, for example, it's okay. But if a person oversleeps and he misses an exam, for example, then it's a calamity. It's a major disaster. So that means the dunya is more respected in the heart than the hereafter. And it doesn't have to be that a person, if he misses an exam, then he becomes joyful and happy. No, no one ever would say that. But where is the level of the concern of the hereafter in the hearts? And the same thing, the excessiveness of things. You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, تِلْكَ الدَّارُ الْآخِرَةُ نجعلها للذين لا يريدون علوا في الأرض ولا فسادا والعاقبة للمتقين. This دار الآخرة, the hereafter, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it for those who do not seek any superiority on the land and no corruption. And therefore, the reason why this love of this dunya becomes in our heart is that, shaitan is working. And the nafs, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us to love the ajila, to love the immediate one. And that's the test of this life. And the more the person grows older, the more that he wants to have more longer life and more hope in this worldly life. As the Prophet ﷺ said in the authentic hadith, قلب الشيخ شاب على حب اثنتين. The heart of the old man is shab, is youth, upon the love of two things. حب العيش, the love of living longer, and the love of wealth. So no one is to think that the more you get older, the less attachment of this worldly life. This is not the case. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ also, لو أن لابن آدم واديا من ذهب, if the son of Adam has a valley of gold, أحب أن يكون له واديان, he would love to have two golds, two valleys of golds. And if there's two, he would love to have three. And then he said عليه الصلاة والسلام ولا يملأ فاه إلا التراب. And the only thing that fills the mouth of the son of Adam is the dust. وَيَتُوبُ اللَّهُ عَلَى مَنْ تَابَ, meaning then when he goes to the grave, when he's buried in the grave. بَلْ تُؤْثِرُونَ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ وَأَبْقَى. You choose, you make ithar of this worldly life, and the hereafter is better and it's forever. So therefore, the having this attachment to this worldly desires corrupts the heart. And it's the key for every evil. As Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he said, وَمِفْتَاحُ كُلِّ خَيْرٍ الرَّغْبَةُ فِي اللَّهِ وَالدَّارِ الْآخِرَةِ. The key of every goodness is to have the zeal, hoping for the rewards from Allah, the hereafter. وَمِفْتَاحُ كُلِّ شَرٍ, and the key for every evil, حُبُّ الدُّنْيَا وَطُولُ الْأَمَلِ, the love of this worldly life and the long hope in it. So this is the key of either good or evil. And that's why, when the Prophet ﷺ talked about the fitan at the end of times, and he said, بادروا بالأعمال, be in haste to do good deeds, because there's fitan كقطع الليل المظلم, fitan like the dark parts of the night. A person becomes falling into these fitan. Why? يصبح الرجل مؤمنا ويمسي كافرا. A man would wake up in the morning a believer, the night comes and he becomes a disbeliever. أو يمسي مؤمنا ويصبح كافرا. Or the opposite. At night time he's a believer, he wakes up in the morning kafiran. Why is that? It's because of this dunya. He says, يَبِيعُ دِينَهُ بِعَرَضٍ مِّنَ الدُّنْيَا. He sells his religion for some apparent things of this dunya. Compromise his religion because of some materialistic benefits of this life. So this is the real corruption of the heart. All of that is because of the love of this worldly life that would take over one's heart. And there is always this the concern should be in the heart, the hereafter and the hereafter only. And this is how a person will get this worldly life and the hereafter. And as a result of that, we see there is no enjoyment when it comes to the dhikr of Allah, when it comes to the ibadah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because this heart has been created to or for the dhikr of Allah. And that's why, when some of the early generations of Islam, they said that a dhikr to the heart is like the nutrition to the body. So when a person is sick, when the body is sick, the person is not able to enjoy the food. And the same thing when the heart is sick, is not able to enjoy the sweetness of the dhikr of Allah. Why? Because the heart has the disease in it of the love of the worldly life. So, and the hadith that we repeated many times, that should be a decision to be made. من كانت الدنيا همه versus من كانت الآخرة همه. Whoever this worldly life is his concern, جعل الله فقره بين عينيه. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make his poverty always between his eyes. Always that he feels that he is in need. وفرق عليه شمله, and he'll make his affairs dispersed everywhere. ولم يأتيه من الدنيا إلا ما قدر له, and only comes to that person from the dunya what Allah decreed for him. So he would not attain anything as a result of having the concern of this worldly life. And whoever have the concern of the hereafter, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would make his richness in his heart and bring together his affairs, and the dunya would come to him forcefully. So this is how the concern in the heart, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make the circumstances according to what is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the bad ending of one's life, when a person is supposed to be upon those who die upon La ilaha illallah. And the way to cure our hearts from this is we have to constantly know the reality of this life, because we will tend to forget. And the way for us to know the reality of this life is to read the Quran. The creator of this life and the hereafter, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, informs us in the Quran about the reality of this life versus the hereafter. So when we read the Quran constantly, and the verses talks about this dunya versus the hereafter, then we should have our hearts to be upon the same belief and upon the same meanings. And when Al-Hasan Al-Basri rahimahullah, he said a very beautiful statement, and I would translate it literally from the Arabic language. He said, أهين الدنيا فوالله لا أهنأ ما تكون حين تهان. Which means, ahinu from al-ihana is humiliate. Humiliate this dunya, this worldly life. He says, by Allah, the most joyful state that you're in when you humiliate this worldly life. I'm not sure if this is an expression that can be understood in English. What is the meaning of humiliate this worldly life? Is when you think of what humiliation is. If you have a human being that you humiliate, what does that mean? That means that you don't really care about that individual. If you're, we don't want to say you humiliate someone because that's evil, but if someone is humiliated, that means he's looked down upon. He's nobody. If he wants to speak, no, sit aside. Don't speak to me now. You just sit there. You don't have any hope from that individual. You're just degrading that person, humiliating that person. So he's saying, do the same thing for this worldly life, meaning the worldly desire only that has nothing to do with the deen of Allah. Treat it that way, you'll become the most joyful person on the face of earth, because it will come to you, and especially if a person is obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, and how fast this worldly life goes, and how the person should having this contentment in this life, how the Prophet ﷺ would say, Allahumma la aisha illa aishu al-akhirah. Allah, there's no life except the life of the hereafter. So this is how this real life is. And when we see the way also that we raise our children, and this is one of the reason why we have this in our hearts, is that the upbringing of the children is oftentimes we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us. We raise them to have more of the concern of this worldly life versus the hereafter. And this is what they talk about, this is what they are with their friends upon, the worldly life, the importance of this, the money, the job, the schools, and things like this, which is, all of these things are to be put in the right perspective. Yes, they need to be disciplined, they need to be diligent in whatever they're entrusted with, and all of that should be for the intentions of establishing the deen. Establishing the deen the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. And so what? Being patient for years, and then after that returning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, receiving the great pleasure and the everlasting reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter. So where is the salawat? Where is the night prayer? The 5 daily salah in the masjid for men, for women to pray the salah in the beginning of its time, and to detach oneself from the distractions, to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to establish the salah, the athkar, the night prayer, even salatul duha, the word of the Quran on a daily basis. These are the most important thing in our life, and raising the children, being obedient to the husbands, and being fulfilling the commands of Allah, and having the hope for the rewards from Allah. This is how this life should be. Otherwise, it becomes a miserable one. So when we talk about raising our children, raising the children to value the hereafter, how the Sahaba radiallahu anhum raised their children, we should not have an excuse because this life is different now. We have to make sure that we seek the help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that our environment is to be controlled by what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us in the Quran and in the Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam teaching Abdullah ibn Abbas, young, saying, احفظ الله يحفظك احفظ لا تجده تجاهك. Guard the commands of Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guard you. احفظ الله تجده تجاهك. If you guard the commands of Allah, you'll find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with you. إذا سألت فاسأل الله. If you ask Allah. وإذا استعذت إذا سألت فاسأل الله وإذا استعنت فاستعن بالله. If you seek help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. واعلم أن الأمة لو اجتمعت على أن ينفعوك بشيء. Know if the ummah get together to benefit you with anything, they will not benefit you with anything except what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordained for you. And if they get together to harm you with anything, they won't be able to do that except with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordained for you. So these certainties in the hearts of the children, to be raised with certainty, to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the pillars of al-Iman, and to be among those who put forward the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before anything and everything, and to have that discipline. And definitely for the women, they have this important role in their households in which the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioned always, is guiding and upbringing their children, encouraging their husbands, to have less burden in this worldly matter, but then rather to be more attached to the hereafter. As one had mentioned with the early generations of Islam, the woman would, before her husband leaves in the morning to work, she would come and grab him from his collar and she says to him, Ittaqillah, fear Allah. He's going out to seek provisions. So she would say to him, Ittaqillah fa innama nahnu bik. That means we are dependent on you. We don't want to have haram in our household. Fear Allah, be dutiful to Allah. She would remind him before he leaves that the concern is not how much money you bring to the home. The concern of the halal is to come to the home. We don't want we don't want the haram even if we will poor for the rest of our life. اللهم اكفني بحلالك عن حرامك واغنني بفضلك عمن سواك. Allah suffice for me with the halal to be away from the haram. And it doesn't matter whether a person is living in the west or the east. The halal is halal and the haram is the haram. If a person chooses to be in an environment where it's difficult to apply certain matters of avoiding haram, then that person chose to be in that place. Then he has to be patient with the commands of Allah, with the deen of Allah. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from the evil within our own selves, and to make us among those who are obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we'll stop here, inshallah. just again another reminder for each and every one of us. But this is a serious matter, because again, this is a disease in the heart that we need to make sure that we work to eliminate it and to replace it with the dhikr of Allah and the ibadah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you all, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us steadfast upon the deen of Allah, and we continue inshallah ta'ala next time, and hopefully inshallah ta'ala can be more benefiting inshallah. جزاكم الله خيرا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وصحبه وسلم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.